In this video, we're going to look at how Strange Young Man, my axe robot, performed at RoboWar's Sportsman event at the start of the year. For those of you watching my channel at the start of the year, you know Strange Young Man here was a bit of a problem child in January. I had a whole lot of issues getting his lifter working and had to change last minute to the axe, which really was just kind of a rush job trying to get something on the robot to have it working in time for the event. That did mean that going in through safeties was actually a big thing for me because it was the first time I could actually really let the robot loose and see what the new drive system and the new weapon system could actually do. So I filmed the entire safety process.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get those in. Leaving rubber on it. I'm using old bike tire, and then. No, I lost a bit of the panhandle, I think. I slammed into the wall.
Oh, I see. The panhandle already broke.
Oh, it's already broken. Okay, that's right. I will fix that. No worries.
You'll also notice in the safety there that we didn't run the axe. We actually run a frying pan because the frying pan was the heaviest weapon configuration I had. It was slightly heavier than this axe, which is obviously what you need to put on to go through weight and safeties is your heaviest possible configuration. And in this case, it just so happened to be a frying pan. The actual test itself was pretty interesting. I was leaving rubber marks everywhere on the floor where I drove. I was using old bike tire to make my wheels, and I thought I was just kind of scraping off the outer layer because I wasn't getting much noticeable difference in diameter in the wheels. So I thought all of that was going to be okay. It was just a bit weird that it was giving so much rubber onto the actual arena floor as it drove around. Also, the weapon worked pretty well, but we did slam the pan into the wall and break the handle of the pan, which was interesting because when I was at home building that pan module to go on here, I had tried to crack the plastic handle of the pan to expose the metal shim inside so that I could just bolt into that instead of relying on the plastic of the pan handle, expecting it to break exactly as it did in the arena in safeties there. Obviously, I didn't put anywhere near enough pressure on that with my tools at home because I could not get it to break until, of course, a 13-kilo robot slammed it into the wall, and that did the job. With safeties out of the way and the robot seeming to work and do the things, it was time for our first fight, and this first fight was up against Topple. If you have seen other featherweight competitions from me, I have fought Topple a couple of times before. It is a very good four-wheel drive, like stack and lift robot. So obviously in this fight we were running the axe, and unfortunately the axe in this fight was very, very difficult to use. It was slow to swing and slow to return, which is never really what you want for a fight like this, especially up against a robot like Topple that is very, very fast and very well controlled, and also has a lot of means to flip me over. The other thing that I was kind of very worried about in this fight was I had never self-righted Strange Young Man with the new weapon configuration, because of course he's designed as a lifter. The lifter would definitely be very easily able to self-right the robot because it can, well, it's designed to be able to flip another 13 kilo robot at the end of its arms. This system is much, much weaker than that, and I had no idea going into the Topple fight if it would even actually self-right once, let alone the 3 times we got in this fight. After that first self-right, I was over the moon. Like, I was so very happy that this system that kind of got bodged together last minute could actually do that, because this is a Sportsman class. There's not a lot of heavily damaging weapons, which means there's a lot of control-based robots, and being flipped over was something I was probably going to experience many, many times over the course of the weekend. So being able to get that self-right was just a huge weight off my shoulders for going through into the rest of the competition, basically knowing that I had some way to protect myself against the very, very good control robots in the field. Speaking of self-rights, obviously we also have to talk about the self-right where I slammed down on top of his saw mini-bot. That was kind of accidental. I was just trying to do the self-right and the mini-bot was trying to come in and cut away at anything that was at ground level. I will absolutely take it though. After the fight, I got talking to the team, and it turned out that as Strange Young Man fell on top of the mini-bot, it effectively shocked it so hard that it unplugged cables from the receiver, and so the mini-bot had no way of being controlled at that point, and it basically just shut down, which is kind of in a ridiculous way of disabling an opponent's robot by falling on top of them and unplugging components inside, but hey, it worked for us, so I will absolutely take that. And of course, continuing with the theme of talking about our self-righting here, we then had one final self-right where Topple stacked itself and also us all at the same time, and I managed to get a self-right off, and unfortunately in doing so, because the floor is made out of wood panels, when I hit the ground, Topple got toppled as well and got back on its wheels. But this one cost me. The weapon never worked after that self-right, and I will show you why in a minute. But yeah, that self-right was the weapon killer for Strange Young Man, which meant that for the rest of this fight, I was fighting on just my drive power alone. And obviously, as we've seen up until this point in the fight, Topple is much faster and much better controlled. So that was not a great position to be in this fight. Of course, then he got us hooked, and we had to have an unstick because, you know, the weapon wasn't working, so I couldn't do this to get the weapon off of his forks, and that meant that an unstick had to be called. Thankfully, at Robo Wars, you are allowed an unstick like that when robots cannot be released by their own power, but it was also not really super good news either, because after the unstick, my drive really started faltering. I mean, we were able to continue and finish the fight, get the full 3 minutes, but the drive system was really shuddering quite badly after that unstick, which is never a good sign from outside the arena holding the controls. But like I said, we did make it to the full 3 minutes, so it went to a judge's decision, but it was fairly clear from basically all of that that Topple had us there. We had him on the damage category by taking out his mini-bot, but by having the weapon go down, he got damage points back against us, and he very, very handedly won the control and aggression points for the fight. So obviously he won that one. Taking Strange Young Man back to the pits and opening him up was a horror show. There were many, many things wrong after this fight, despite the fact that we managed to make it the full 3 minutes. First and foremost, the battery was ridiculously hot and also puffy. I'm pretty sure I killed one of the 6 cells in my big 6S battery, And that is basically what did the battery in, was that killing that kind of put more strain on the rest of it, and it overheated. It was really, really bad on the battery. And that was just the first of my problems. The wheel issue that I saw was all of the wheels getting loose. They all look like this. Which is obviously really, really not good, because that means my wheels could flop around, and also the shaft was able to turn a little bit inside the wheel, meaning that there was less power going into the wheels from the motors and the gearboxes. And that's why I was seeing that weird kind of shutter steppy drive, is where the wheels were kind of getting desynced from the D-shafts inside them and just causing bad times. This was because all the grub screws that I had in, they were M4 hardened grub screws. The ones on the flats had been ground out by the power of the drive system, which is obviously a bad thing, and meant that everything loosened up and did not work very well at all. Then on top of all of that, we go to the weapon system, where the belt drive that I'm using to run the arm in here stripped. Basically, the teeth got ripped out of the belt itself, which is ridiculous. I'd never seen that happen before. The belts themselves, well, like the outer edge of the belt was fine. These belts are fiber reinforced, and those fibers were absolutely okay, but all of the teeth got stripped off of that inner hardened layer, or like that inner reinforced layer, meaning that basically it didn't work, because where the smaller pulley was coming off the motor, it just had a whole bunch of stripped teeth around there that it could get no grip on, meaning that it could not throw the axe around anymore. And this thing is fairly hefty, which means that, yeah, it certainly would not be able to do anything once the strip section of belt got around that lower pulley. So obviously some changes needed to be made. First of all, I couldn't put that battery back in. Now, I also thought that 6S battery I'd been running for quite a number of years, so it may have just been old, and because it was stored maybe at the wrong charge level and stuff, that might have been what killed the battery. So I borrowed a slightly newer 6S battery. It was smaller in capacity, but I thought that that was going to be okay, and I put that in the robot. I had a second weapon belt, or actually I had a couple of weapon belts for this event, so I slapped a new weapon belt in and changed the weapon over to my lightest configuration. This configuration is very, very heavy. It's like 1 kilo, 2 kilos, something like that, with the crossbar and the axe head, and anything that uses this particular crossbar is quite hefty. So I had a different crossbar that was an aluminium piece, and I could put a screwdriver on it. Very, very light, so much easier to swing, and I was hoping that that lighter weapon would mean that the belts would hold up just that little bit better in a fight and maybe survive till the end. Then onto the drive, I realized that the M4 grub screws were just never gonna cut it in this weight class with this level of power going into the wheels. And thankfully, my pitmate Richard had all of the tools and equipment to drill out the holes, tap them to M6, and also had some M6 hardened grub screws that I could use to basically beef up the system. So I spent most of the rest of the day doing this. This was a 2-day competition. We were supposed to get 6 fights, ideally 3 fights each day. However, I had to spend so much time drilling and tapping and getting all of this stuff working that I basically missed all the sessions other than the first session and the last session of the day. So we really only got 2 fights on the first day of this competition, and it was all down to having to try and fix all the issues that happened in that Topple fight. And a massive, massive thank you to my pitmate Richard for all of his tools and equipment that was used to get Strange Young Man back up and running again. Without him being there, the drive would have been absolutely trashed the entire time, and I probably only would have got a couple of fights out of it before I rounded over literally every grub screw I had in my possession and could not drive the robot anymore. Because without that upgrade, I definitely would have just been destroying grub screw and grub screw and grub screw every single fight until I had none left to put into the arena. Obviously, with all those changes, I had to do a quick test of everything to make sure it was all working. So I put the robot back into the arena, and very thankfully, things seemed to work. The lighter weapon swung a whole lot faster than the big heavy axe did, and the drive seemed to be a little bit improved as well, which was really, really good to see, having just put many hours of effort into actually getting it running again. Having said that, getting it running again was a double-edged sword, as our next opponent was Fang, a very, very mean crushing robot. Oh, that was a rough fight to watch, wasn't it? Oh man, Fang really, really went for Strange Young Man's head. Thankfully, this is a TPU print. It's a fairly solid TPU print, and the TPU did its job spectacularly. It got crushed every which way and kept springing back into place, which is exactly what I wanted to see out of this head. Obviously, we lost most of the pieces, eyes, ears, mouth, everything, but that's okay. Those are designed to come off. Well, kind of. They're designed to be printed separately and glued on so that I can have them all different colors and things, and the side effect of that is occasionally they fall off and I have to super glue them back on, which, you know what, I'm not mad about. It does make Strange Young Man quite the spectacle when somebody can attack his head and kind of blow pieces off like Fang did in this fight. And I really feel like Sportsmans are a good class for spectacle, so, you know, I kind of think it's in keeping, really, at least as far as I'm concerned on this one. From Strange Young Man's side though, that was an interesting fight. The weapon was certainly faster, it did let me put the weapon down a lot more times throughout the fight, and also the self-righting seemed to be a little bit better. Not having quite so much mass on the other end of the arms did seem to help it out along the way quite a lot. However, it didn't fully fix the issue. We of course lost the weapon again later on in the fight, which is not great. And it was also exactly the same issue as the first time. We stripped the teeth off the belt, in exactly the same way we did in the Topple fight. So really at this point in the competition there, I kind of figured that that might be an unavoidable thing that is just going to happen to us as we keep fighting Strange Young Man. I did bring some spare belts, but not that many. I did ask around the pit, and unfortunately people had belts that were like 3 sizes smaller or 3 sizes larger, and nothing I could really use to substitute for my own belts. So I had to be very, very careful about how I used them and when I put new belts on and things, because I knew that I was stripping and destroying belts on the way through. So it was just going to be a bit of a planning game to make sure I had enough belt that I could use for the entire event, because this is a Sportsman competition. Having a weapon is mandatory. If you cannot show weapon use before or during a fight, then you basically are going to lose those fights. And if you keep not being able to show weapon use, you get DQ'd and you cannot compete. So having that weapon belt was very, very important, and I was going to be running low pretty soon. Obviously, the other thing that happened in this fight is one of the arms came loose. Now, this was basically my bad. There is a locking bolt in the end of the weapon arms here that is used to keep the weapon arm on the actual axle in here. And I had not put a locking nut on that. I'd put a regular nut on that. It came loose over the course of the fight. The bolt fell out, and then just during one of the swings into his crusher, the right force got put in the right place and off it went. And did its own thing from there on out. It was a bit interesting watching that arm still work with only one side, but I really do need to just make sure that I do that properly from here on out, because that was a very silly way to lose functionality of a weapon. Not that the weapon was super functional against a very well-built machine like Fang, but yeah, you know, it's better to have it working properly than working at half capacity. And that kind of brings us to the end of this fight. Here, Fang grabbed hold of us, threw us over by the door, and as he let go, Strange Young Man just seemed to shut down. This was a battery issue. The smaller battery I put in, I completely ran it all the way out of capacity. I killed the battery dead. I basically brought every single cell much lower than 3 volts, which is where their bare minimum is supposed to be, and the entire robot browned out. Other than the LEDs in the eyes, which kept going for a little while there, because they weren't drawing too much power out of the battery. I also learned after the fight, when I took the whole thing apart, that I had ripped the tires off one of the wheels, which was jamming up inside the robot, also probably overdrawing more current out of the battery, leading to destroying it much, much faster than I would have otherwise. I'm not really sure exactly when this happened in the fight, but it doesn't matter. The smaller battery on top of this extra drain meant that, yeah, we ran out before the 3 minutes were up. There was like 20 seconds left to go, but yeah, so that broken tire probably did all the difference. Without its extra drain on the battery, we probably would have lasted those extra 20 seconds and gone to a judge's decision. Not that I expect that the outcome of a loss for us would have been any different had we gone to the judges, but it still would have been nice to make it all the way there. The post-mortem after this fight was just as bad, if not worse, than the Topple fight. Taking Strange Young Man apart was a horror show again. Once again, we had killed the battery, as I've already mentioned. The damaged tire was very, very obvious from the jump. The damaged weapon belt was very obvious from the jump, but things got worse from there. The brand new M6 grub screws that I'd put in had also started to round out and loosen up, which is obviously not what we want for this robot, because it meant that some of the drive power was being lost into wobbling the wheels rather than actually pushing power into the ground. And that was very, very disappointing, having just spent all day basically drilling and tapping and replacing everything to try and upgrade and improve that system. Sure, the M6s weren't ground down as much as the M4s were, but it doesn't matter. If they're grinding down, it's still going to have a detrimental effect to the drive system itself. And then on top of all of that, the material I was using as a kind of floor material, there's an under chassis made of hardox in here, but it has weight-saving holes in it, so I needed a material that all of my electronics could sit on and just stay alive on. and I used some like very thin cutting board material. As it turned out, that was not HDPE because in this fight it cracked and warped and broke in many places. Basically, it ended up being more duct tape than whatever that material was after this fight, because I just had to keep going around and repairing cracks in the thing. Which was really not good, and goes to show you just how much damage that Fang can actually do, because it was doing that just by like slamming me into walls and things, let alone with the power of its crusher. Speaking of the power of its crusher, the head did a good job at like lessening some of the damage, but Fang still got in underneath it and put some really hefty dents into the top plate here, like completely through the TPU head, which is just ridiculous to think about. Those pieces of damage I didn't worry too much about, though. There wasn't much I could do to kind of panel beat this panel back into shape, and it was still mostly fitting on the robot, so I just kind of left those alone, especially when I had much bigger problems in all of the rest of the robot to go and fix. From my end, I did actually manage to put a tiny little bit of damage on Fang. I managed to get the screwdriver into one of his googly eyes and put a scrape on it, which is nothing compared to what Fang did to me, but I'm gonna take my tiny little victory in this moment, because honestly, coming out of that fight before I went over and saw the robot, I thought I had done nothing to them at all. So I'm gonna take my tiny little scrape on their eye as at least something from this fight. From here, I needed to work out what on earth I was going to do. Obviously, the wheels needed to be fixed again. This time round, I decided that what I was going to do was apply Loctite to the shaft of the motor itself, and basically have Loctite hold the hub of the wheel on, as well as some grub screws. I swapped over all the M6 grub screws again. Thank you again to Richard for having those and allowing me to use those and keep Strange Young Man running with them. And I had Loctite in the bottom so that the Loctite was the thing really doing the holding and not really the grub screws. I was hoping that by having the pair of them that less damage was going to occur. Also, with the damage to the rubber tires, and also with the fact that the rubber tires were leaving rubber everywhere in the arena, I decided it was time to swap over to some molded and cast polyurethane wheels, which are a little bit grippier and a little bit hardier, or at least I was hoping hardier, than the rubber that was kind of shedding little bits of rubber everywhere around the place as we were driving. And also I dropped the robot back to 4S rather than 6S. My thinking here was that I was killing the 6S batteries by trying to draw too much current, by trying to drive way too fast. On 6S, Strange Young Man's top speed should be somewhere in the order of 50 to 60 kilometers per hour, which is far too fast for a featherweight combat robot, and my thinking was that trying to put far too much power through the gearboxes and stuff was what was killing our motors and also actually killing the hubs and everything as well. So I made all of those changes, put the 4S in, and put Strange Young Man in for a test.
Is that 4S?
That's 4S. That's fast on 4S.
That's fine.
That's the hammer at
on
full
4S?
speed on 4S.
That's
Okay?
still pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm thinking 4S is my go here, because that's the hammer. Hammer's going to be slow on 4S. But
Yeah, but you were also having trouble with the return on it before.
That's
That's
fine.
zippy.
that's zippy, and importantly, it's controllable and not
Yes,
jittery.
yeah.
Which went well. It was far more controllable on 4S and also faster, which is not something I was expecting. I'm not really sure if that was down to the polyurethane wheels getting more grip and therefore allowing more speed to be transferred from the motors into the robot, or if it was down to the fact that I'd reduced the maximum top speed, which meant that the ESCs were more capable of putting out that much power, or the required amount of power to get the robot up to that top speed. Or if it was just like an overheating thing, I don't know. All I would say is that I was much happier with the performance of the drive system on 4S than I was on 6S, which is a weird thing to say. And with that, we are at the end of the first day. I left the robot at the event overnight, hoping that the Loctite would set up properly and would help a lot with the drive system so I wasn't gonna have loose wheels coming out of every single fight. on the next day. Starting bright and early on day 2, I had a fight against Picasso, which is an all-metal pickaxe robot. My first impression of this fight is, wow, Strange Young Man got real fast. Like, I knew that in the testing from the night before, but I hadn't really given the sticks a good thrashing because I was trying really hard not to kind of wear the Loctite or like move the Loctite while it was still setting up. In this fight, I got an opportunity to really just go hard with driving, and oh boy, this drive system flies on 4S. In fact, I have people coming up to me after this fight being like, what did you do to improve the drive system that much overnight? And I said, I dropped voltage. And everybody was kind of a bit shocked by going a lot faster on less voltage, but that is how that worked. Also, as you could see, the weapon didn't really work. It worked a little bit like in testing right before the fight started, but after that it stopped. And I think that's due to the VESC browning out, because the VESC is programmed for 6S, so the top end of 4S voltages is probably basically telling it that the battery was running flat, and so it just shut itself down, meaning that I basically had no weapon for this entire fight, which wasn't really all that good, especially up against an axe as dangerous as Picasso. Obviously, that danger or that energy that goes into that pick is a double-edged sword, though. Very early in this fight, she got herself stuck in the floor, and there was a 10 count that happened, and as that 10 count was happening, I was sitting there, and I decided that I didn't want to win the fight like that. I've got a nice big TPU squishy head on Strange Young Man. I like big overhead weapons to hit the TPU head. It's interesting and it's fun and the crowd loves it. and that hadn't happened yet, and B, it was a bit early, and C, it would have sucked for her to have stuck herself on the floor and just lost so soon into the fight. So I, right at the very end of the 10 count, broke her free. I could have been a little bit better on my timing on that front. Everybody was a little bit confused as to whether she'd been unstuck in time or not, but then the fight was allowed to continue, which was great because, again, I really didn't want to win that way, effectively. From there, it was just me trying to bully her with the speed of the drive because that's basically all I had. I was basically trying to get her from the side and slam her into walls, or try to bait the pick into the ground because I knew if we were nose to nose, as soon as she fired the weapon, I could back up fast enough to get out of the swing of the weapon, and I did actually do that in a couple of cases. Obviously, there were also cases where she backed me into the wall and put the pickaxe into the head, which is great. I love to see it when people put weapons into the head. That is what it's there for. And after she'd done that, she did get herself stuck another couple of times, once before and once after and stuff, or a couple of times after. And I decided that once she'd damaged the head, that was it. There was no more unsticking from me. I'd got out of the fight what I wanted from it, which was a bit of a spectacle. Unfortunately for me, though, she did keep managing to unstick herself from the floor after I decided that was going to be where I would leave the fight if it got to that point. Now, at the very, very end of this fight, I did get stuck on something on the floor. Picasso came over, put a couple of nice big dings in the back of Strange Young Man, but after the fight was called, as in after time was called for the fight, the jostling from Picasso had actually knocked me off of whatever I was stuck on, and I was able to back my way over to the door, proving movement. Which actually allowed me to win the fight on a judge's decision. I think partially because I should have won the fight, but I chose to keep fighting. I think that kind of helped me over the line there. At this point, I was now at 3 fights. I was lagging behind where most other people were in terms of fight schedule, and they wanted me back in the arena very quickly. And I said I could probably go back in, but the issue with the weapon would happen again. And as mentioned, this is a featherweight sportsman competition. You need a weapon to be part of the competition. And so they said no. They said I was not allowed to compete unless I knew that the weapon that I was putting into the arena was actually going to work. So I had 2 choices at this point. I could either reprogram the VESC and hope that reprogramming it to accept the lower voltage that Strange Young Man was now running would allow it to keep working and keep swinging the arm as I drove around the arena and dropped the voltage off the batteries. Or I could do something very silly, which is I could take one of my spare drive ESCs and jam it in as the weapon ESC. The reason I say that's quite silly is because none of my drive ESCs had a back in them, which means they could not power the receiver. So the way to get the weapon ESC, or the drive ESC to be a weapon ESC, was to use the VESC as a back. Which is what I ended up doing. It was faster and easier for me to wire up a quick little Y harness and jam it into Strange Young Man than it was to reprogram the VESC. So, for this next fight and all preceding fights, Strange Young Man had a VESC in it acting as the world's most heavy and expensive 5-volt regulator because, again, it was easier and quicker than trying to deal with the programming of the VESC and getting all of that working, especially because doing that program would have meant having to put everything in the box and get it all tested and sorted and everything, because part of programming a VESC is spinning the motor up, and they definitely would not have liked me spinning a weapon motor up on my pit table. And, you know, we were in the middle of a fight day. There were fights happening all the time. Trying to find time to get into the arena and do that would have been way more problematic than just putting in a little Y connector. And, yeah, running a very expensive piece of kit as a very simple piece of kit. But there we are. With that, we are now going on to our next fight. I was running out of belts. I had one good belt left, but I didn't want to use it yet. I wanted to save it for an upcoming fight and an upcoming weapon configuration. So I decided to put on an old belt to Strange Young Man, but just move it so that the damage to the teeth was up on the big pulley and that the small pulley had brand new belt teeth on them, basically hoping that that configuration would allow the belt to actually keep moving, and that as long as the damage stayed up around the big pulley, things should, in theory, keep going. With all of those changes in place, we ended up versing Stacking Mantis, built by Richard, my pit table mate who had helped me immensely throughout this competition. So, there was some good out of this fight. Obviously, the drive system, again, is very fast and very good. I really like how this system works on 4S. It will be interesting to try it again on 6S with the polyurethane wheels, because of course I changed both of those things at the same time, so I'm not really sure if it's those or the lower voltage that is making the drive system work quite this well. But something has happened, and Strange Young Man is driving very well for the first time in this entire competition. I mean, I'm going to say that after 2 back-to-back fights where the drive just mostly worked here. Unfortunately, the thing that did me in this fight is that I was fighting a lifter and a flipper and a stacker. Stacking Mantis is designed to grab hold of people and throw them around or stack them against the wall, and he did exactly that to Strange Young Man. Now, the big problem with this was that the old belt that I was using, as I tried to self-right, I spun the arm too far in the wrong direction, taking the piece of damage on the belt and moving it down to being on the small pulley on the motor side, killing the weapon. That's it. That's all that happened in this fight, is that I moved the piece of damage belt the wrong way and we got stuck upside down, unable to get out of that, because where the torque was needed for the weapon to self-right, Strange Young Man was in a section of damage belt. Which is unfortunate. Obviously, I could have avoided that if I had put on the final good belt that I had access to, but I'd chosen to do this way so that I could save that belt, knowing that I was only at 4 of 6 fights and I had more fights to come. So, yeah. Unfortunately, this is a problem that could have been fixed with more replacement parts, but given the rush build of the weapon system, by the time I had decided and worked out that a belt system was going to work, I didn't have time to order more replacements and just had to run with what I had, leading to this fight and this loss. Unfortunately, sometimes that is how this stuff goes. There'll be upgrades and improvements done to this. I've got many ideas. But for now, we're going to move on and go into our next fight. Now, this fight I knew was fight number 5 out of 6. So I did put on the new belt, and I also decided that with the new belt, I might as well see how the system worked with the heavier weapon back on it. So I did a quick test with the axe. I got some really weird buzzing sounds out of it, I think with the belt skipping and things not being quite tensioned correctly, but on 4S and with the other ESC, it did manage to throw the axe around. So I decided that, look, this is probably the last chance I'm going to get to have a good weapon in a fight, so I put on the frying pan because I hadn't got to use it in a fight yet, and I was going to be damned if I didn't get a frying pan fight out of Strange Young Man in this configuration. Obviously, though, we needed a target for that frying pan. In this particular case, we ended up fighting a robot called Saw Loser. This is an undercutting saw robot, but he had to be run upside down because that was where his switch was placed, and they did not allow you to turn a robot over after you had powered it back up, so you had to start effectively upside down against it. Aha! This was everything I wanted out of the frying pan. I got so many hits in with the frying pan, and that was beautiful. Now, I also have to come clean a little bit about some of the footage that you've been seeing and some of the stuff you've been seeing here. Obviously, all of this is filmed from outside of the arena, and a big, big thank you to Gabby and others who helped me with filming over this particular weekend. But all of the sound you are hearing is not from outside the arena, it's from inside the arena. This is because RoboWars runs their events as ticketed spectator events. So they are trying to have the best possible atmosphere for their spectators who have paid to come and see robots smash each other silly. That means in the background of all of the fights, they run a lot of commercial music, stuff that is very, very copyright music that I cannot let you listen to, otherwise YouTube will demonetize this video or pull it down entirely, or take huge sections of my video and mute them, which for me takes away some of the essence of the robot fight when you can't hear the smacky thing go smack and hit something. So instead, I put a GoPro in the corner of the arena. Its entire job was to record sound for all of the fights so that I could dub that back over the footage from outside the arena so that basically I didn't get hit with the copyright strikes and things from the songs that were playing in the background this whole time. However, the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because in this particular fight, when I got the most smacks with the frying pan was right in front of the camera that was inside the arena. So I get to show you this. Oh, when I tell you I was laughing like a madman after that exchange, like on the pit side, like on the side of the arena driving my robot, I was cackling. I was losing it. It was incredible. That little exchange is everything I wanted out of the frying pan on this particular robot. Obviously, it's not going to do any damage, but that was ridiculous and a perfect use of that weapon, and I was so happy with that. So happy, in fact, that after we had that happen, I had another like half a dozen to a dozen shots with the frying pan, and then the weapon went down. It went down in exactly the same very predictable way that you should be expecting at this point. I tore the teeth off that final good belt that I had, meaning that the weapon got stuck over the front, like that. And doing that was actually probably a good thing. It meant that I could use the frying pan as defense, and I could use this very heavy steel bar and the arms as defense for the chassis, which the top plate is aluminium, but these side panels are fairly thin plastic with a sheeting of metal on the outside, but it's not enough to stop a saw, and Saw Loser did get a few really good hits in before the arm got stuck down in front. And of course, with all this new drive power slamming into him and slamming into walls, I then managed to bend the frying pan up and make it look like a little shield that he was hiding behind as he was driving around, jamming it into Saw Loser over and over again, which was very, very funny to me. We then, of course, got a good line drive on him, kind of picked him up with the frying pan and managed to throw him over. I was a little bit worried about that because then he was an undercutter and my wheels are very close to the corners on this robot, so I was fully expecting him to come in and cut all of those out. But I got very, very lucky. The height of his saw blade is perfectly the same height as the Hardox underframe that I have in Strange Young Man. And of course, in a fight with a saw versus a Hardox frame, the saw loses that and the Hardox is mostly unscathed. Sure, there's some extra damage to the armor paneling and things, but for the most part, the underframe is totally fine and was definitely good enough to go on through into another fight, which I was very glad about. If he'd managed to cut into the wheels, I probably would not have gone on into more fights from this one because I didn't have enough spares of the wheels to be losing them. Then let's talk about the very end of this fight. There was some weirdness in my drive system. The drive started to slow down and become a little less responsive as the fight wore on. I'm really not quite sure of the cause of this at this point. To me, it could have been one of three things here. One, it could be the battery was starting to draw too low. I mean, the 4S battery I put in here had a decent capacity, but probably not really enough capacity to be running this robot for a full 3 minutes. Thankfully, it did survive, but I think more capacity and more C rate would probably be good for a battery running this drive system. Two, I think maybe the ESC is overheated, or three, maybe the motors themselves overheated, because it was a very temperamental thing and it was very intermittent. It really did seem like I was getting periods of stop and slow down and then something would like fix itself inside the robot, like something would calm down and suddenly I could line drive really fast again, but it was very temperamental and intermittent. So it does feel like maybe an overheat or maybe a battery drain thing. Definitely something for me to do some testing on in the future. This drive system is far, far, far too fast and overspec'd, but it works, so I'm probably going to keep using it at least for a little while. Hopefully I can figure out what that problem is and stop it from doing that towards the end of fights. Not that it really mattered in this case though, because Sore Loser had a problem that I was having all of the first day, which was killing batteries, browning out a battery so far that the robot just shuts down. That is what happened to Sore Loser at the end of this fight. He well overdrew his battery and killed it entirely, shutting his robot down and giving us the win. So here we are with 5 fights done for the competition, 2 wins and 3 losses at this point. Unfortunately, there is one final fight that wasn't really part of any like tournament structure or anything. I did a rumble with Topple and JusticeBot, who are very, very cool robots. Unfortunately, I did not put my camera in the corner of the arena because this was a very last-minute thing for me to get thrown into this fight. I was sitting there going, I'm good, I'm ready to go, I want another fight. I'd moved my belt around so that I could maybe throw the axe a couple of times. And I got put into this fight at the last second from memory. And that meant there was no time to really set anything else up. So that was fun. Obviously, I used a hammer attachment, which was the final attachment that I hadn't used on Strange Young Man all weekend. I wanted to do that because, you know, it rounded out my list of weaponry. And it also killed the belt properly. It did not last very long in this fight at all, but, you know, by this point in the competition, I had killed all of my belts. Nothing was really working quite right, and it just struggled, basically. The other thing that happened here is I killed one of my gearboxes too. One of the wheels on the drive side actually went down and is currently locked up. I do need to do a whole teardown of Strange Young Man and work out what happened to that. I've got some spares, I should be able to fix that, but this was my last fight of the day, so I didn't end up really worrying about fixing that issue, especially as it was going to take a while to get that whole drive system out, and get a replacement into the robot. So we lost that one on the judges. Again, not really part of any real tournament structure or anything, given that it was just kind of a rumbly fight. It was just fun to be in there and do one more fight for the competition. And there you go. That is how Strange Young Man performed at the start of this year. It was a time. So many things went wrong, so much work had to be done on the robot at the event. And I've come away learning a lot. I really do want to do a breakdown of Strange Young Man sometime in the near future. That might end up being a stream, so if you are interested in following me live as I pull this robot to pieces, subscribe and keep an eye out for that, because again, I do want to do that sometime fairly soon. Once we've done that and we know exactly what went wrong, I really do want to dig into upgrading the whole system, upgrading the drive, getting rid of those hubs and doing something better for that, and getting rid of the belt system on the weapon. That is obviously not performing very well. I think I could change that over to gears or something. The belt was mostly there because I was worried that if I didn't have that, then way too much torque was going to be transmitted into the gearbox and the motor, and it was going to break everything. But it managed to self-right a couple of times without doing any of that. So I think it should be fine to run an external gear stage and keep everything working without those belts that are causing me all of that issue, basically. But I won't know more about that until I've just pulled the robot entirely apart and gone from there. But yeah, that is going to be it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.